Picture this: you're ankle deep in mud, your only pair of socks is made of wool and disappointment, and your diet consists of barley, sadness, and the occasional weevil. The year is 1347, and the world is very literally ending. Disease is coming. War is never far. And you're a peasant, which basically means your job is to suffer, quietly. But don't worry. Tonight, we're going to gently tuck you into the worst century of all time. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where sleep comes easy when you're unconscious from starvation. If you enjoy sarcastic doom with a side of bedtime tranquility, gently curse the like button, whisper your devotion in the comments, and consider subscribing for more peasant core nightmares. Let's rewind the doomsday clock to the year 1347. You're not dead yet, congratulations, but give it time. You are living in what historians like to call the late Middle Ages, but what your mud-soaked boots and aching spine call a mistake. Europe is a brooding, pre-apocalyptic painting. The sky is grey with ash and guilt. The soil is tired. The people are tired. Even the goats look like they've seen things. This is not the Renaissance. There are no cute cherubs or wise philosophers. This is the trailer for the world's worst sequel, Famine 2, Plague Boogaloo. You're a peasant. And I don't mean that in the modern, ironic, Twitter bio way. I mean that your life is measured in blisters and barley. You owe a chunk of your grain to your landlord, another to the church, and the rest to the rats. And that's assuming the harvest doesn't fail, which, by the way, it probably will. Because here's the thing they don't tell you in school. The 14th century wasn't just unpleasant. It was the century of cascading doom. Europe is already limping from the Great Famine of 1315, where 3 years of non-stop rain turned farmland into one giant failed soup recipe. Crops drowned, livestock rotted, and yes, some people ate corpses. That's not metaphor, that's dinner now. In 1347, things feel ... off. The weather's still erratic. Crops are moody. There's a lingering tension in the air, like history is holding its breath before it coughs in your face and kills half your village. But we'll get there. For now, let's focus on your average Tuesday. You wake up not to an alarm clock, but to the sound of a rooster audibly judging your life choices. Your home is a one-room cottage made of wattle and daub, which is medieval for hope and cow poop. The roof leaks, the floor leaks, your neighbor leaks, everything leaks. Breakfast, if you're lucky, a bowl of yesterday's pottage, a sad stew of boiled whatever. If not, just some bread and the thrilling sensation of hunger. You grab your tools, mostly sticks with anxiety, and head into the fields. Because your survival depends on you convincing angry dirt to produce wheat. And while you're out there, remember, this isn't your land. It's owned by the local lord, who lives in a drafty stone cosplay of importance. You work his land in exchange for the right to not be arrested. That's serfdom, essentially feudalism's least fun subscription service. But at least you have God, or more accurately, the Catholic Church, which at this point is less a spiritual guide and more a medieval IRS. Your village priest reads Latin. You do not. He claims to understand salvation. You nod politely. If something bad happens, it's probably your fault for thinking impure thoughts about butter during Lent. Still, there's comfort in ritual. Sundays are for church. Festivals offer brief reprieve. There's music, dancing, the occasional public execution. Medieval people really knew how to throw a party. But even those are tinged with fear. Sin, death, damnation, they're not. Abstract ideas, they're your roommates. And then there's the nobility, the top of the pyramid. They ride by on horses taller than your house, wearing fur, lace, and smugness. These are the people who go to war for sport and invent taxes out of boredom. If you see them, lower your eyes and pray they don't remember your name. Being noticed by a nobleman is like being licked by a lion. Oddly flattering, but extremely dangerous. Outside your village, the world is boiling. Political tensions simmer like a very unfun stew. England and France are throwing hands in what will eventually become the 100 Years' War. The Mongols are out east, making European maps, nervous, and in the Crimea, something festers. You don't know that yet, of course. You're not reading the news. You can't read. But rumors reach even the most remote villages. Ships sinking with no crew, cities emptied overnight, a sickness that blackens the skin and boils the body. Superstition and hearsay spread faster than any plague, and they are the first signs that something horrible is on the way. So yeah, welcome to 1347. Welcome to the end of the world. But don't worry, you won't be alone in your suffering. You'll have rats, religious trauma, and an entire generation of equally miserable peasants to keep you company. Misery loves company, and medieval Europe is very social. What's most remarkable isn't just how awful it all is, it's that people still find a way to live through it. They keep planting, keep praying, keep falling in love in muddy fields. With people named Agnes and Wulfric. They marry, they mourn, they tell stories by firelight. Because even in the worst timeline, life sort of keeps going. But here's the question no one's asking. What happens when nature, nobility, and God all seem equally pissed off, and they all come knocking at once? We're about to find out. Sleep tight. Let's say your name is Elric. Not because your parents were fantasy novel enthusiasts. They just really liked names that sounded like grunted syllables. You're 31 years old, which makes you the village's senior citizen. Your joints ache, your teeth are planning their exit strategy, and your best friend is a chicken named Beatrice, who does not like you. You were born in this village, a vaguely organized cluster of thatched roofs, smoky chimneys, and mud. Lots and lots of mud. You'll die here too, most likely of something that today we would classify as mildly preventable, like a splinter or a light cough. You don't travel. Travel is for soldiers, nobles, and people who've already given up. The furthest you've gone is to villages over, and that was only because someone stole your cow and forgot to be subtle about it. You got the cow back. The thief got syphilis. All in all, a solid outcome, but today is just another day. You wake before dawn, not with a smile, not with purpose, just awake. Your bed is a sack of straw that used to be fluffy but now functions primarily as a storage unit for fleas and regrets. You step out into a room that is also your kitchen, dining area, and barn. Your mother snores in the corner. Your brother mumbles scripture in his sleep. Beatrice, the chicken, is already judging you from her perch. Breakfast is simple. Oats, maybe, or bread that doubles as a weapon if thrown. You chew mechanically, staring out at the pre-dawn fog like a soldier awaiting orders from the sun. There's no privacy, no plumbing, no concept of me time. Your only alone time is when you're pooping, and even then, Beatrice follows. She's very emotionally codependent for poultry. You throw on your only tunic, brown, itchy, and indistinguishable, from a potato sack, and begin your walk to the fields. There are no shoes. There are foot wraps, made of old cloth and hope, held together with twine. They absorb the mud in much the same way a sponge absorbs tears. Your job is simple: survive. But survival requires output. You need to till soil, plant crops, and perform seasonal labor for the Lord who owns everything, including the soul of your grandfather and your ability to say no. This is feudalism, a vast, elegant system of land ownership and crushing peasant misery, perfected over centuries by people in funny hats. Let's talk taxes. You pay the Lord with your time and grain. You pay the church with tithes, usually 1/10 of your produce. You also pay various random fees that seem to be invented weekly, like the Harriet, a death tax. If you die, the Lord gets your best ox, which is nice, because grief and bankruptcy make such lovely neighbors. You also owe labor. 1 day a week, you drop everything to work. The Lord's domain, his personal land. Harvest time, everyone works. Don't show up. Expect a fine, or worse, a visit from the reeve, whose job is part sheriff, part snitch, and 100% unpleasant. The reeve wears a slightly better hat than you, and walks like a man who has memorized every tax regulation, but not a single joke, mid-morning. The sun creeps through the fog and reveals just how unromantic the countryside really is. This isn't the painterly medieval aesthetic modern shows love. This is weeds, flies, and fertilizer. Your back hurts, your feet are wet. You still owe the miller 2 sacks of grain for grinding last season's barley, and rumor has it he's started charging in chickens. Let that sink in. You're poor in chickens. Around noon, you pause to eat. Lunch is the same as breakfast, only sadder. You nibble a hunk of bread and try to ignore the crunch that might be a weevil. You chat with fellow laborers, other peasants like you, each with their own collection of debts, bruises, and familial drama. Someone's daughter ran off with a traveling friar. Someone else's son won't stop talking about moving to the city. Everyone laughs. No one believes him. Occasionally, someone farts and blames the devil. It's funnier than it should be. Then it's back to work. You dig, you hoe, you sweat through fabric that has never known a wash cycle. The sun stares down like a judgmental God. Your hands are calloused. Your knees creak. You are 27 but look 50. No one has ever explained what retirement means, but you don't complain. Complaining is for poets and people with options. You just keep going, 1 row at a time. Sometimes, to make the day pass faster, you think about how your life would be different if you had been born a noble. You could wear velvet. You could sit. You could eat meals that required more than 1 spice. Then a beetle crawls up your sleeve and ruins the fantasy. As afternoon wanes, your lord rides by. His horse is cleaner than your house. He doesn't acknowledge you, because acknowledging peasants encourages opinions. His entourage chuckles as they pass. One of them throws a half-eaten apple into the dirt. You wait until they're out of sight, then pick it up. Dinner, you finish your work just as the sky begins to dim. Your muscles scream, your stomach whines. You trudge back home, boots sloshing in fresh puddles. The village smells like smoke, sweat, and cabbage that forgot how to be edible. Inside your home, the fire sputters in protest. Your mother stirs something questionable in a pot. You eat it. Anyway, hunger is a great seasoning. Your brother recites more scripture. You pretend to listen. Beatrice pecks your boot and stares. You sleep early, not by choice, but by necessity. There is no light to read by, no radio, no podcasts, just the sound of wind through slats and your mother whispering prayers she learned from someone who didn't survive childhood. As you close your eyes, you wonder, not for the first time, what it would be like to live anywhere else, to have a choice, to see the world, to not spend your life bent over a patch of earth that never quite loves you back, but you don't dwell. Dreams are expensive, still. Don't you wonder what it's like beyond the village? What if the rumors are true? What if something worse than the reeve is coming? Let's address the stinking, pox-ridden elephant in the room. Did medieval peasants ever bathe? Or were they simply born sticky and stayed that way until they died of something involving pus? Welcome to Hygiene, 1347 edition, where the bathwater is communal, the soap is optional, and lice are considered emotionally supportive pets. Let's begin with the myth that everyone in the Middle Ages was so filthy they made modern sewer rats look like luxury spa guests. The truth, yes, and no. Medieval people weren't trying to be disgusting. They just had some logistical issues, namely, no plumbing, no germ theory, and a deep theological suspicion of nakedness. They also lived in close quarters, bathed infrequently, and thought disease was caused by bad smells and sinful thoughts. So, there's that. But before you throw all of medieval Europe into the biohazard bin, let's back up, because bathing actually was a thing in theory. There were bathhouses in cities and towns, many of them public, and often built near natural springs or rivers. Some were gender segregated, others were not. Some were innocent hygiene hubs, others were just thinly veiled brothels with extra steam. You could get a warm bath, a cup of spiced wine, and maybe lose your virginity to someone named Magda, all in one visit. Luxury, of course, if you were a peasant. And let's face it, you weren't exactly frequenting your local bathhouse. Most villages didn't have one. Instead, you bathed at home, which meant heating water over a fire, pouring it into a wooden tub, and hoping no one stole your privacy while you were elbow deep in suds. That was a huge ordeal. Water was carried by hand. Firewood was precious. Bathing was not a casual Wednesday event. It was closer to a seasonal sacrifice. But they did clean themselves. They wiped their faces with damp cloths. They washed their hands before meals. They cleaned their feet when possible. They even rinsed their mouths with wine or vinegar. Medieval mouthwash brought to you by desperation. Soap existed, too, though not the fragrant triple-milled stuff your ex uses. Medieval soap was made from animal fat and lye, and it smelled like betrayal. It stung, it left residue, but it technically removed grime, which made it better than nothing. Kind of, but let's not get too romantic. The average medieval body was still a petri dish. Lice and fleas were normal. Everyone had them. Nobles, priests, that weird guy with a lute. You could delose yourself by running a comb through your hair over a white cloth, squashing anything that moved. This was called nitpicking. Yes, that's where the term comes from. Gross and educational. Clothing hygiene wasn't much better. People wore the same outfit for days, weeks, sometimes months. Undergarments, if they existed, were rarely washed, and outer garments were often aired by hanging them near smoke, which masked the smell of decay with the smell of burning goat hair. A win-win, really. So was medieval hygiene, a total disaster. Yes, but also, no. Within their means, medieval people tried. They weren't oblivious. They associated cleanliness with godliness. even if their definition of clean involved holy water and a light breeze. And they had some routines that sound almost modern. For example, monasteries were surprisingly hygienic. Monks had scheduled washings, trimmed beards, and communal latrines that flushed with diverted river water. Of course, they also bled themselves to balance humors. But let's not get picky. Then there's the story of Brother Raymond, a Benedictine monk in France. Raymond was devout, disciplined, and deeply committed to personal suffering, which in the 14th century was a competitive sport. He believed the body was a temple of sin and decided to cleanse himself spiritually by never washing it, ever. Over 17 years, his skin developed a crust so thick that pilgrims began chipping flakes of it off and selling them as holy relics. Raymond died as he lived, itchy and popular. Of course, most people weren't trying to grow a personal biofilm of sanctity. They just wanted to not smell too much like death. Unfortunately, the medieval understanding of disease made that hard. They believed in something called miasma theory, the idea that bad air, often from decaying material or filthy people, carried disease. This is why plague doctors wore those terrifying bird masks. The beaks were filled with herbs and spices to purify the air, as if cinnamon could stop a pandemic. This led to some interesting behavior. People burned incense, carried flowers, or walked around holding orange peels under their noses. In 1347, as plague crept closer, some cities banned bathing altogether, not because it was bad, but because it opened your pores, which were apparently portals for disease demons. So yes, they avoided bathing to stay healthy. This worked about as well as you'd expect. Now, let's talk bathrooms. Or rather, let's talk holes. Medieval toilets were called privies. In cities, they were often communal, attached to homes, inns, or monasteries. Waste dropped into cesspits, which were occasionally emptied by heroic professionals called gong farmers. These men waded waist-deep in human filth to shovel out excrement by hand. Their pay was good. Their social life, not so much. In rural areas, it was simpler. You pooped in a ditch, or behind a bush, or in a wooden box with a hole in it. If you were fancy, you had a chamber pot. If you were really fancy, you emptied it out the window while shouting Gardilou, which loosely translates to heads up, incoming tragedy. Toilet paper, by the way, didn't exist. People used moss, hay, cloth scraps, or, brace yourself, their hands. It was a different time, a much more textured time, and yet, somehow, people survived. Not all of them, obviously, but enough to build cities, write poetry, fall in love, make babies, and complain about the weather. Because medieval life wasn't just filth and death. It was also resilience. People adapted. They shared knowledge. They passed down tips, like how to keep rats out of your grain, or how to make a foot soak from rosemary and wine vinegar. Self-care, peasant-style. And even, amid the worst of it, they had humor. Satirical poems mocked bad breath and smelly neighbors. Popular songs referenced stinking kisses and foul armpits. It was all very real, very gross, and weirdly comforting. There's something soothing about knowing that humanity has always been this disgusting, and it's not like we're perfect now. Sure, we have hot showers, shampoos with 10 syllables, and deodorants that smell like existential crisis, but we also sit on public toilets, breathe recycled airplane air, and eat food dropped on the floor if we catch it in 5 seconds. Progress is relative. Still, when we picture medieval peasants, we tend to imagine them as greasy, lice-ridden swamp. Goblins. And sure, some were. But most were just people doing the best they could, one cold bucket of water at a time. So the next time someone says, medieval people never bathed, you can confidently say, actually, they did occasionally. Miserably and with deeply questionable soap. Now, breathe that in. Dust, rosemary, and a faint whiff of goat. Let it settle, because tomorrow we'll talk about something even more intimate than body odor. We're going to open the medieval pantry. Hope. You like turnips. It's 1347. You are starving. Again, not in the trendy, intermittent fasting, I skipped brunch for my gut health kind of way. No, you are deeply, profoundly, ancestrally starving. Your stomach is a gaping pit that echoes with the ghosts of missed meals. It grumbles like a storm cloud with trust issues, and yet you're used to it, because food, in your medieval peasant life, is more theory than reality. Let's talk cuisine, or what passes for it when your pantry contains nothing but barley, turnips, and a mildly hostile onion. You live in a one-pot world, a universe of gruel, a culinary hellscape where spice means accidentally finding a mustard seed and luxury is eating something that once had legs. Breakfast. You're lucky if there is breakfast. Sometimes it's just ale. Not fancy, fruity IPA ale. We're talking barely fermented barley water ale. Breakfast beer. It's warm, flat, and safer than water, which often contains more bacteria than flavor. Midday. A bowl of pottage, a never-ending stew made from whatever's not rotting. Picture this: barley, cabbage, onions, maybe some beans, all simmered into a paste so emotionally vacant it makes hospital food look expressive. And dinner. Leftover pottage, maybe with extra turnip. Maybe not. The fun thing about pottage is that it's a dish that never ends, not because it's abundant, but because you just keep throwing stuff into it, day after day. It's like a medieval sourdough starter, but with more weevils and heartbreak. Also, don't forget the bread. Bread is everything, not a side dish. The main character, peasants eat coarse rye or barley bread, often black, sometimes stone-laced accidentally. Those little bits of grit left from primitive milling. They slowly grind down your teeth until chewing feels like filing your molars with a cheese grater. You may think grain is boring. In 1347, it's life or death. Wheat. That's for the rich. The kind of people who can pronounce Latin without crying. You eat barley, rye, oats, sometimes millet, all of it grown by hand, harvested with pain, taxed without mercy. When the harvest fails, which it often does, because nature hates optimism, you turn to acorns, roots, or anything vaguely chewable. Tree bark. If it's not poison, give it a go. There's no off-season in peasant food life. Every meal is dependent on what the earth feels like giving, and the earth, in 1347, is kind of in a mood. Remember the Great Famine of 1315? Of course you don't. You weren't born yet, but your parents did. And they don't shut up about it. From 1315 to 1317, it rained non-stop. Crops drowned, roads washed out, livestock dropped dead in fields. The famine got so bad people ate cats, dogs, horses, and allegedly, in rare cases, other people. So yeah, every bad harvest feels like it might tip back into cannibalism territory. Morning, a crust of barley bread dipped in thin ale. Lunch, pottage, featuring 2 beans, half a cabbage leaf, and one anonymous root vegetable. Snack, a stolen apple that tastes suspiciously like guilt. Dinner, same pottage, thicker now. More regret per bite. Dessert, a small handful of dried peas. You chew slowly to make it last. The flavor profile is desperation with undertones of dirt. ELRIC, dreams of cheese. Not because he's ever had any, but because someone once described it in song. That's how desperate he is for new textures. What about meat? Ah, yes, the fantasy. Meat is rare. Chickens offer eggs. Cows offer milk. Pigs, possibly, if you're rich enough to own one. When animals are slaughtered, it's during the feast season, and even then, the best cuts go to the Lord. You get the mystery bits. Ever heard of black pudding? It's pig's blood, mixed with fat and oats. A delicacy, or tripe. The stomach lining of a cow, boiled until sadness. Or trotters, pig's feet. So chewy they count as cardio. Sometimes Elric traps a rabbit, but it's illegal. The forests are owned by the nobility. Poaching is a crime. So if he's caught, he might be fined, or worse, whipped. All for a meal that tastes like gamey shame. Here's the fun part. The church calendar dictates your diet. Feast days and fast days. Fast days are brutal. Nearly half the year is no meat. Fridays, Lent, Advent, Ember days, random saint days. So instead, you eat fish. Except you live 90 miles inland. So your fish is often salted herring that's been sitting in a barrel since it was caught by someone who sneezed into the sea. On actual feast days though, oh baby, that's when the good stuff rolls out, if you're lucky or invited. Bread with honey, roasted meat, tiny portions, cheese, fruit, maybe a pie that contains actual fruit and not just a wistful drawing of one. For peasants, feast days are magical. One time, Elric had chicken and ale that didn't taste like foot. He still talks about it, 5 years later, as if it were a religious experience. Milk, sure, if the cow is producing, it's turned into butter or cheese. Quickly, fresh milk spoils faster than your optimism. There's no refrigeration, remember? Cheese is hard, salty, and smells like victory. Butter is used sparingly, mostly by the rich. You see it once in a dream. Eggs are currency. If a hen lays one, you don't eat it, you trade it for salt or herbs or something equally magical like rope. Flavor in 1347 is a complicated thing. Spices, that's exotic nonsense reserved for people with money and maps. The average peasant doesn't even know what cinnamon is. But there are herbs, sage, parsley, dill, nettles, sometimes leeks. Occasionally garlic, if you're lucky, and don't offend the village healer. These are thrown into the pottage like confetti at a very sad wedding. Salt is precious. You trade for it, you hoard it. Sometimes you don't have it, and then everything tastes like boiled nothing, sugar. That's the stuff of Crusader legend. If Elric saw sugar, he'd probably snort it out of curiosity. Food preservation is medieval black magic. You salt meat, dry it, smoke it, pickle things in vinegar until they resemble science experiments. Fruit is dried, if you have it. Grains are stored in sacks. Root vegetables are buried in sand or straw to last the winter. Spoiled food, you scrape off the mold and carry on. Mold is just seasoning with commitment. You eat everything, stems, peels, bones, boiled into broth. Nothing goes to waste. Hunger has no pride. Water is dangerous. Rivers are filled with waste. Wells are unreliable. Boiling takes fuel. So you drink ale, weak, low alcohol, and often cloudy. Children drink it. Monks drink it. You drink it. Constantly. Wine is for nobles and churches. Elric's had it once. It was sour and made him believe briefly in dragons. Mead exists, but mostly in stories. If you're really desperate, there's posset, hot milk, curdled with ale or wine. It's like bedtime tea, but haunted. In this world, food is not just sustenance, it's hope, it's status, it's story. Remember Elric's chicken, Beatrice. Last month, Elric traded her for 4 onions and a prayer. It wasn't easy. They'd known each other for years. Beatrice was opinionated and possibly cursed, but she laid reliable eggs and judged people effectively. But Elric's mother was sick. He needed something to flavor the broth. The onions were pungent, potent, and expensive. He cried after the trade. Twice, once from emotion, once from slicing the onion. He still thinks of her. When the soup tastes unusually judgmental, meals are eaten together. In one room, on one table, often from the same bowl. You use your fingers, or, if you're lucky, a shared wooden spoon. Etiquette is simple. Don't hog the bread, and don't double dip unless you outrank someone. You chew slowly. You laugh. When you can, you share stories, old myths, new rumors, gossip about the Reeves' suspicious rash. Food is not just nourishment, it's connection, it's comfort, even when it's made of boiled barley and regret. Imagine it now, it's late. A winter wind howls outside. Snow gathers on the threshold. Your hands are cracked from the cold. Your breath fogs the air. You sit with your family around the hearth, eating a bowl of thick pottage. It's not delicious, but it's warm, and tonight, no one's starving. Tomorrow, who knows? But for this one quiet evening, with a wooden spoon in your hand and hot stew in your belly, you are full. Let that sink in. In a world built on scarcity, a single full stomach is a revolution. Next time, we'll leave the bowl behind and step into something even deeper. The medieval mind, faith, fear, demons, and divine dreams. It gets weird. Sleep softly. Imagine waking up every day knowing that the devil is real. God is probably disappointed in you, and your cow might be possessed by demons again. Welcome to the 14th century worldview. You're Elric, and you've spent most of your adult life ankle-deep in mud and soul-deep in fear, not just of hunger or taxes or the Reeves' judgmental eyebrows, but of eternal damnation, of invisible sins, of the devil dancing in your dreams, of saints watching you pee, because in medieval Europe, dirt and divinity weren't opposites, they were roommates, and they were fighting over who gets to wreck your life first. There was no such thing as not religious. Everyone, peasant, noble, even that weird hermit who lived in a tree and ate moss, believed in God, not just as an idea, but as a full-time, micromanaging supervisor. God was everywhere. In your crops, your childbirth, your thunderstorm, your goat's diarrhea. And he wasn't subtle. If lightning struck your house, divine punishment, drought. You probably thought about sex on a holy day. Your neighbor's son born with a sins of the father. The church was the institution, the final boss. It explained everything. Why there's war, why there's famine, why your wife died in childbirth and your cousin was born with a third nipple. Spoiler, both were your fault. Every village, no matter how sad, muddy, or goose-infested, had a church. It was the tallest building, and not because they liked good architecture. It literally reached toward heaven. It was also the calendar, the courtroom, the therapist's office, and the medieval Twitter feed. Your week revolved around it. Mass on Sunday, feast days for saints you couldn't pronounce, fasting days, marriage blessings, infant baptisms, public penance for adultery. Shout out to Agnes, who had a very bad Lent last year. The church was run by a priest, often one of the few literate people around. He spoke Latin, you did not, which meant you had no idea what he was saying, but you nodded anyway, because nodding prevents excommunication. And trust me, you did not want to be excommunicated. That meant no sacraments, no burial in sacred ground, and worst of all, eternal damnation. Even if you were right, even if the priest was a known drunk with a side hustle in tax fraud, didn't matter. He had God's stamp of approval. Let's talk about sin. You had a lot of it. Lying, sin, laziness, sin, missing church because your child was dying of dysentery, sin, thinking about your neighbor's wife's ankles, big sin, she's married, you're married, and God is always watching. There were mortal sins, big no-nos, that sent you straight to hell, and venial sins, which were more like minor infractions. Think of them as the difference between murder and double-perking your ox cart. The solution, confession. You went into a little box and told your priest everything. In theory, in practice, you lied a little. Just enough to seem repentant without getting assigned 40 Hail Marys and a 3-day bread and water punishment. You weren't made of time. Penance was your spiritual workout routine. Confess, suffer, repeat. Hopefully, die with your soul freshly laundered. Heaven. Glorious, white robes, golden light, harp music, maybe a cheese platter. But very hard to get into. Basically VIP. Hell. Eternal fire, screaming, demons with very creative torture devices. A popular image in church art, excellent for scaring children. Also, adults. But the real showstopper was purgatory, a temporary suffering pit for people who weren't bad enough for hell but too gross for heaven. It was invented as a kind of spiritual DMV, long, miserable, and full of paperwork. But if you prayed hard enough, or if someone prayed for you, you could eventually get promoted. This is why people left money in wills for priests to say masses after they died. It was spiritual insurance. The original thoughts and prayers. Package, forget red horns and pitchforks. The medieval devil was cunning, shape-shifting, and deeply committed to your moral failure. He whispered in your ear. He gave you nightmares. He might even possess your cow. Demons were considered a daily hazard, like frostbite or nobles. You could catch a demon by being sinful, by being near sin, or by accidentally saying the Lord's name backwards during a lunar eclipse while menstruating. You know, typical hazards, witches. Oh yes, though not yet the witch hunts of later centuries, suspicion was already brewing. Women, especially those who lived alone, knew herbs, or had opinions, were sometimes accused of working with the devil. Elric's cousin Hilda once cured a fever with a clove of garlic and a chant. She now lives alone on the edge of the woods, and children dare each other to knock on her door. She's not a witch. She just likes quiet and hates everyone. RELATABLIT, on the brighter side of the divine scale. Saints. Glorious, glowing. Saints. If you got sick, you didn't call a doctor. You prayed to Saint Sebastian for plagues. or Saint Anthony for lost things, or Saint Apollonia for toothaches. She had all hers pulled and didn't scream once. Apparently relics were the rage, pieces of saints' bones, shards of the true cross, even the Virgin Mary's breast milk, allegedly preserved in little vials that, well, let's not think too hard about the logistics. People went on pilgrimages to see relics, not for fun. For salvation, you walked hundreds of miles with blistered feet and a wool cloak just to stare at a splinter in a golden box and hope it fixed. Your kidney stones. Faith was desperate, but it was sincere. Your dreams weren't safe, either. People believed dreams could be messages from God, or tricks from the devil. A good dream, divine guidance. A bad dream, demonic temptation. A wet dream, straight ticket to confession, do not pass go. Nightmares were often blamed on sin, or bad digestion, or demons sitting on your chest, which is a real thing called sleep paralysis. But to Elric, it just means the devil is back for another midnight chat. Sister Agnes, yes, that Agnes once had a dream where her nose bled. Gold coins. She interpreted it as a sign of divine wealth. 2 days later, she tripped on a loose tile and broke her nose. Coincidence or divine sass? You decide. Religion wasn't just a Sunday thing. It was every minute. You began the day with prayer. You worked under the gaze of saints painted on walls. You marked hours by the church bells. You thanked God before eating your turnip and after not choking on it. You blessed your animals. You blessed your tools. You blessed your water before drinking and again after surviving it. Festivals marked saints' days, Candlemas, Michaelmas, All Saints, and the ever-popular Feast of Fools, where the world turned upside down and peasants mocked their lords. Gently, of course, with approved sarcasm, but even joy had rules. Laughter was fine, unless it led to dancing. Dancing led to touching. Touching led to sin. Sin led to hell. So maybe just stand in the corner and smile politely at the bread. Every night, before sleep, Elric whispers the same prayer. God above, keep the rats from the grain, the mold from the bread, the reeve from my doorstep, and the devil from my dreams. He's not poetic. He's not even sure the prayer works. But he says it anyway, because something deep inside him, deeper than hunger, deeper than fear, tells him that someone is listening. Or at least, watching. Let that sink in. In a world where you can't read, can't travel, can't escape, your station, the only freedom you have, is belief. Belief that suffering means something. Belief that good will be rewarded. Belief that behind the clouds, above the mud, someone sees you know. And yes, to us it sounds extreme. The burning incense, the relic kissing, the confession marathons. But when you live in a world where nature is unpredictable, government is a sword in a robe, and death is always nearby, religion becomes the thread that holds you together. It explains the inexplicable. It gives rules to chaos. It turns grief into meaning, and maybe, just maybe, it makes this brutal little life bearable. But belief doesn't plow fields. It doesn't defend villages from bandits. And it doesn't stop the rich from squeezing the poor like overripe plums. Next, we climb the social ladder, or at least stare at it from the bottom, and meet the nobility. Spoiler, they're not sending help. Let's imagine, for a brief, delusional moment, that you aren't Elric the peasant. You aren't shivering in a straw bed, counting your remaining teeth, or praying for rain to ruin your neighbors' barley instead of yours. Instead, you are perched atop the rickety scaffolding of medieval society, draped in fur and self-importance. You are a noble. Congratulations. You may now eat real meat, speak bad French, and legally own enough hats to terrify a modern runway. But for the rest of this chapter, let's drop the wishful thinking and look up from the peasant fields, from beneath the shadow of the manor, at those who rule, the lords, the ladies, the barons and knights, the earls and the kings, the architects of your daily suffering. Because if you want to understand why your life is a wet, muddy poem of misery, you need to meet the people writing the verses. Let's start with the big picture. Medieval society was a pyramid, and not the fun Egyptian kind with cool treasure and ancient curses. This one was built out of blood, sweat, and a very creative system of debt. At the pointy end, there's the king. Beneath him, a stew of dukes, counts, barons, and knights. Below them, your local lord, the guy who taxes your dreams and occasionally rides by on a horse so shiny you suspect sorcery. At the base of the pyramid, you, your family, and everyone who ever mistook a turnip for dinner. You don't move up the pyramid. Social mobility is not a feature, it's a glitch. The closest most peasants ever get to the upper crust is when a nobleman's hunting party tramples their vegetable patch and then apologizes by waving in your general direction. Meet Lord Roderick. He inherited your village, along with a complicated collection of debts and a sword he never learned to use properly. He lives in a manor house, stone, drafty, perpetually under repair. He has servants to cook his meals, wash his shirts, and blame for his own mistakes. Roderick spends his mornings reviewing his lands, by which I mean he stands on his balcony, sips wine, and yells at people to work harder. His afternoons are occupied by hawking, letting birds do his hunting for him, jousting practice getting hit with sticks by other bored nobles, and inventing new taxes. His evenings are spent at the table, feasting on actual meat, complaining about peasants, and quietly worrying about what happens if the king ever visits. Occasionally, Roderick remembers to inspect the village. He rides in, surrounded by attendants, looks disapprovingly at your leaky roof, and demands to know why you haven't paid your tithe in full. He nods at your daughter who hides, frowns at your chicken who glares, and leaves with a vague promise to address village concerns, usually by raising taxes or conscripting your cousin for another one of the king's endless wars. Let's talk taxes. You already give 1/10 of your grain to the church, a portion of your crop to your lord, and whatever's left to the rats. But your lord is always short on cash. Why? Because war is expensive. Because parties are expensive. Because his third cousin in Normandy needs a dowry. And because his own manor roof is constantly leaking, which is, frankly, relatable. So he invents taxes. Taxes on grain, on beer, on marriage. Taxes for using the mill, the oven, the forest, the river, the bridge, and sometimes for breathing too enthusiastically in the direction of his favorite dog. If your father dies, you pay a death tax, the Harriet. If you want to marry, you pay a marriage tax. If you inherit a goat, you pay a goat tax. All these taxes keep Roderick's household running. They also keep you poor, hungry, and angry. But quietly, because open revolt is hazardous to your health. Here's how feudalism works. Land is wealth. The king owns all the land but gives pieces of it to his lords in exchange for military service and sometimes bribes. The lords let knights run manors in exchange for fighting or, let's be honest, looking good in armor. The manors are worked by peasants who pay in crops, labor, and a healthy dose of existential dread. You can't leave the land without permission. If you do, you're a fugitive. If you marry outside your lord's estate, you need his approval. He can refuse. He can fine you. If he's feeling generous, he can grant permission and charge you for the privilege. The whole system runs on favors, threats, and the vague promise that everyone, even the lowest peasant, is protected by someone higher up. In theory, in practice, the only thing protecting you is your own bad luck, and the hope that Roderick is too hungover to remember you exist. Every village has a manor court, a blend of judge, jury, and medieval improv theatre. Lord Roderick, or his steward, presides. He settles disputes, your pig ate my onions, assigns punishments, 3 days in the stocks for insulting my mother's hat, and collects fines. The court is less about justice, more about maintaining the delicate balance of power. If you're caught poaching, you might be whipped, or fined, or both, depending on the Lord's mood. If you refuse to pay, your property is seized, your house raided, your family threatened. The reeve, his local enforcer, ensures compliance. The reeve is usually a peasant himself, but elevated by the Lord to keep the peace and collect dirt on his neighbors. He is both loathed and feared, and his main skill is remembering everyone's secrets. Let's not forget the supporting cast in this aristocratic theatre. There's the bailiff, Roderick's manager of estate affairs, part accountant, part bully. The Hayward, who oversees the fields. The beadle, in charge of discipline. The ale-cunner, who tastes ale to make sure it's not watered down, objectively the best gig, unless you value your liver. And, yes, the fart catcher, an actual job. The fart catcher walked behind the Lord, swatting away bad smells with a fan made of feathers. Because apparently, being noble means never letting a little wind disturb your delicate sensibilities. Every one of these jobs is designed to keep the peasants productive, the taxes flowing, and the Lord's boots mud-free. Life for the nobility is frankly boring. Sure, you get feasts, hunts, and tournaments, but most days are spent waiting for something interesting to happen, like a messenger from the king, or a boar rampaging through the orchard. Nobles amuse themselves with chess, dice, falconry, and elaborate poetry that makes absolutely no sense. They throw masquerade balls, organize jousts where people often die for fun, and play medieval versions of Who's Richer Than Whom. They also love building things, towers, chapels, ditches, and taxing you to pay for them. Sometimes, a noble will embark on a crusade, a religious war for salvation and loot. They leave, waving dramatically, and return years later with exotic trinkets, new diseases, and stories about bathing in the Jordan River, which they will recount at every feast until you want to join the next crusade just to get away from them. The law exists to protect the powerful. That's not sarcasm. It's just the 14th century business model. If you steal bread, you might lose a hand. If a noble steals half your harvest, that's feudal rights. If you insult the Lord's honor, you could be whipped, imprisoned, or fined so heavily you'll be paying it off in grandchildren. Women are property, children are labor, and justice is a matter of status, not truth. Peasants dream of fairness. Nobles dream of tax exemptions. Knights are the action figures of the nobility, sworn to defend the land, uphold chivalry, and occasionally look good in tournaments. They wear armor that costs more than your entire village. They practice swordplay and jousting. They're supposed to protect the weak, in theory. In practice, knights often bully peasants, start fights with rival lords, and demand hospitality from villagers they're passing through, which means free food, free ale, and a bed, which you'll never get the stains out of. But knights also bleed. They die in war, in duels, or from infected wounds sustained while trying to impress a lady with their jousting skills. Noble women are trapped in their own gilded cages. Married off at 12 or 13, they are bartered for alliances. Their lives are sewing, praying, managing households, and producing sons. If they fail, they're replaced. But noble women are not powerless. Some run estates, oversee accounts, and even rule lands when husbands go to war. Some, like Lady of the next county, become legends for their wisdom, generosity, or skill at outwitting rival families. They know all the secrets, carry all the grudges, and orchestrate revenge with the precision of a medieval soap opera. Still, most noble women would trade their silk gowns for the right to walk in the woods, alone, or read a book without permission. Feasts, tournaments, armor, castles, it's all paid for by you, the peasant. Every new tax, every forced Labor Day, every demand for gifts and services falls on your shoulders. When Roderick builds a new tower, you carry the stone. When he hosts a wedding, you provide the food. When he angers a rival, you fight. In his militia, if you're lucky, he rewards you with a nod and a prayer. If you're unlucky, you get conscripted into a war you don't understand, in a country you can't pronounce. Here's the thing about this delicate social order. It works until it doesn't. Bad harvests, rising taxes, foreign wars, plague, all put pressure on the system. Peasants grumble, then plot, then sometimes revolt. Nobles feud with each other, dragging their people into personal vendettas. And sometimes, rarely, the whole thing teeters and collapses. But that's another story. For now, as you lie in your straw bed, exhausted from a day spent enriching someone else's legacy, you can't help but wonder, what if the world changes? What if the peasants say enough? What if the lords can't protect you from what's coming? Sleep on it. You'll need your strength. Let's not sugarcoat this. If you are a peasant in 1347, war is not just a distant thunder. It is a season, like rain or famine. You live with the taste of iron on your tongue, the echo of marching boots. In your sleep, war is a neighbor who never moves away, only grows louder. You'd think, after a few centuries of constant bloodshed, the ruling classes might get bored, pick up chess, or learn embroidery. But no, medieval Europe is the original reboot franchise. If it's not a Viking, it's a Norman. If it's not a Norman, it's a Frenchman. If it's not a Frenchman, it's your own lord, suddenly mad about a boundary stone or a rumor about goats dow. In this fateful year, the 100 Years' War is rolling like a thunderhead across the channel, promising not glory, but attrition. There are rumors that French soldiers ride through villages like wind, eating stores, torching huts, leaving behind only mud and memory. But that's not the half of it. There are local feuds, bandit gangs, tax collectors, turner looters, mercenaries. From nowhere and everywhere. War, in 1347, is a hydra. Cut off one head and two more grow, each uglier than the last. Let's be clear, your home is not a castle. Castles are for people who argue about soup etiquette and wear colors in winter. You have a hamlet, a handful of houses, a crooked church, a few precious acres of fields and forest. There's no wall. The best defense is to pretend you're not there, or to run to the woods and hope the soldiers are as lazy as they look. Still, the fear lingers. It haunts the meal, the work, the bedtime story. Elric remembers his father's tales of the last raid, the way fire moves faster than memory. Every time a dog barks at night, every time a strange face appears on the road, you hold your breath. Is it a peddler or a scout, a neighbor or a spy? Paranoia is its own weather. When war comes, the Lord's Reeve arrives with a list and a glare. Every household owes service, whether in bodies or in coin. If you are young and unlucky, you are handed a spear, a helmet that smells like damp regret, and a rough goodbye from your mother. You join the levies, a patchwork army of farm boys, fishermen, and people who really wanted to be anywhere else. There's no training. Maybe you get a day of drills how to walk in a straight line, how not to stab yourself with the wrong end of a pike. You march off, chanting psalms and curse words, eyes on the banner, stomach in knots. For those left behind, the fear is double. You watch your sons and brothers disappear, and pray that when the war is over, at least some of them will return. If you're lucky, they come back with a few coins and nightmares. If not, the field gains another nameless grave. The rules of war are simple. Don't die, don't starve, and if you find something valuable, take it. Armies are infamous for stripping the land, bereating all the stores, slaughtering the livestock, tearing down fences for firewood. Sometimes the enemy is French, sometimes English, sometimes nobody can tell. The language of war is hunger. Your family hides their grain in sacks beneath the floor. They tie chickens up in the woods, bury coins in a hollow tree, pray that the smoke from the chimney doesn't draw the wrong kind of attention. When soldiers come, there is no resistance. You kneel, beg, watch your year's work disappear in a single afternoon. If the soldiers are bored or drunk, sometimes they take more your tools, your dignity, your child. There's a saying, God made the countryside, but the devil made the soldiers. Nobody laughs when they say it. If you live near a town with a wall, congratulations, you are now a target. Sieges are long, hungry, and loud. The enemy surrounds the town, cuts off the food supply, and waits. Inside, bread runs out. Salted meat grows green. Water turns foul. Dogs and rats become protein. Disease moves faster than arrows. Sometimes, you're caught outside the walls when the enemy arrives. Then you sleep in the ditch and pray not to be noticed, a ghost in your own home. After months, if the town holds out, maybe the attackers get bored and leave, maybe not. If they break in, it's chaos. Pillage, fire, death, and the kind of silence that makes you wish you could forget how to hear. When armies move, famine follows. The fields are trampled, the grain stores pillaged, the animals eaten or scattered. You replant if there's time. But hunger is not patient. It settles in your bones, and it's democratic. Lords, peasants, priests, soar, go hungry when the land is empty. Elric remembers the year when the village harvest failed after a battle nearby. His mother boiled weeds, fed him broth made from boiled leather, wept in silence. The winter was cold, the spring colder. Some villagers left, never returned. Others did, but changed. Let that settle. War is not a story of knights and banners. It's a story of children with hollow eyes, of mothers with empty arms, of bread that tastes like nothing at all. The enemy is not always a foreigner. Sometimes it's your own neighbors. Feuds between villagers over a pig, a boundary, or a broken promise can erupt into violence. Blood feuds last generations, demands tribute, and so it goes. Bandits thrive in the chaos, the forests fill with men who've lost everything, or who simply prefer the outlaw life to starvation. They prey on travelers, sometimes raid villages, often vanish before the Lord can muster a response. Justice is swift and brutal if you're caught. Peasant rebellions are rare, but not unknown. When taxes are unbearable, or when a new lord tries to tighten the screws, villagers may gather, armed with pitchforks and anger. The revolt seldom lasts. Nobles have armor, swords, and the king's justice. Peasants have hope and, occasionally, a lucky rock. Even when the fighting stops, war lingers. Fields must be cleared, houses rebuilt, debts paid. The Lord demands compensation for lost taxes. The king's men arrive to draft more soldiers or collect new levies to fund the next campaign. Old soldiers come. Home changed if they come home. At all, Elric's cousin returned from the front with a limp and stories he would not tell. Some take to drink. Some simply disappear into the forest or the nearest city. Villagers shrink. There are more widows, more orphans, fewer strong backs to plant and reap in the winter. People tell stories around the hearth, not of glory, but of survival. If you're feeling smug, sitting in your heated apartment, reading this on a glowing screen, consider, in the medieval village, war is just the world's worst group chat. Everyone's arguing, nobody listens, and the outcome is always disappointment. Except, in 1347, you can't mute the notifications. You can only hope they don't show up at your door. The cycle repeats, century after century. Borders shift, kings change, but the story remains the same. The ones who suffer most are never the ones making the decisions. They're the ones standing in the mud, watching the smoke rise, holding what's left of a life they built with their own hands. Let that sink in. Breathe it in smoke. Fear and the faint hope that tomorrow might be quieter. Picture this. It's night. Elric crouches in the field, watching the horizon for torches. His wife sleeps fitfully, clutching their baby. The old men have stashed their tools, the young men their pride. If the soldiers pass by, maybe they'll be ignored. If not, maybe they'll survive by being quick or quiet, or by offering up the last of their stores. There's a wordless prayer in every movement. Let us be invisible. Let us be spared. Some nights, the soldiers don't come. The village wakes to another dawn, another chance. Other nights, they do. You live on the edge of dread. You ask yourself, sometimes in the silence, after the last child stops crying, why it keeps happening. Why kings fight for crowns they'll never wear. Why lords feud over fields they'll never plough. Why men die for banners they've never seen. No one in the village can answer. The priests say it's God's will, or the devil's mischief. The Lord blames the king blames the French blame the English blame everyone else. For the peasant, blame is irrelevant. All you know is the land is tired, your body is tired, and war is always coming. If Elric could write, and he cannot, he might pen a letter to the king. Your Grace, we are loyal. We work the land, pay your taxes, pray for your health. But each season the wars come. Our children are hungry, our homes are burned. What do you want from us? When will you let us rest? But no such letter is written, and no king would read it. The only record of peasant sorrow is in the worn hands, the quiet fields, the missing faces. Sometimes the only victory is survival. Elric watches the smoke from the last skirmish fade into dusk, kneels to plant the new seeds, hopes that the earth will forgive what men cannot. He tells his children stories of a world without war. He knows they are lies, but he tells them anyway, because hope is as important as bread. That's what keeps you going, after all. Not the promise of glory, but the stubborn faith that, one day, you'll wake to birdsong and not the sound of drums. Just as your village begins to settle, just as you dare to hope that war is moving, Anna, new rumor creeps through the countryside. It's not an army, not a bandit gang. It's something else. Something that travels faster than horses, strikes harder than any sword. A sickness, a shadow. And, for the first time, you wonder if war was actually the lesser evil. Sleep now, if you can. The worst is yet to come. It begins with a whisper, a rumor slipping down from the silk roads and across the wind-dark sea. A story so outlandish most peasants dismiss it as the usual nonsense. Somewhere, they say, in the distant east, a whole city went silent overnight. Ships arrived in Sicily with no living crew, just cargo and corpses. The plague is coming, mutters the tinker at the edge of the market. God's wrath is upon us, proclaims the priest, louder each week, as if volume might keep death at bay. But the plague is not a story. It is a shadow on the horizon, an invisible thief in the night, and it is coming for everyone. You are Elric, and you are not ready. In the late spring of 1347, life in your village is still small and predictable. You plant, you harvest, you barter, you survive. There is always trouble, too much rain, too little grain, a reeve with a vendetta against your chickens, but these are the evils you know. If you wake in the night, it's hunger that rumbles, not fear. You hear the usual prayers from your mother, the distant snoring of the reeve's dog, the muttered curses of your neighbor as he wrestles with his goats. But the mood is shifting. The travelers from the city bring strange tales. The merchant who sold you salt last month has vanished. The abbot at the local monastery is burying more brothers than ever before. In the fields, talk of the pestilence becomes impossible to ignore. You laugh it off, the way peasants have always laughed off things they cannot change. You have too many worries already. This year's barley is late to sprout. Your roof leaks more than ever, and Beatrice the chicken's ghost still haunts your dreams. There is no time for invisible monsters, but as the summer passes, the rumors grow teeth. The disease arrives quietly, at first. No banners, no horsemen, no loud declarations, just a cough in the night, a fever in a child who should have recovered from a simple chill, a swelling beneath the arms, more, then large, then horrifying. You have seen sickness before, of course, typhoid, malaria, pox. Life is a catalogue of ailments and prayers. But this is different. The priest cannot help the healer's potions. Do nothing. The afflicted sweat, choke, and die within days. You visit your neighbor's house to lend a hand. The smell hits you first, sweet, rotting, unholy. The children wail. The parents do not move. Someone whispers the word, buboes. A black, swollen lump in the armpit, the groin, the neck. The local healer, her hands, trembling, she has never seen anything like it. Elric stares into the face of his friend and sees a future he cannot name. There are no maps that show its spread, only stories each, one more terrifying than the last. In the cities, it is said, bodies pile in the streets. Priests drop their censers and run. Rats flee burning houses, carrying death with them, hidden in their fur, their fleas. Soon the countryside is not spared. Entire families vanish within a week. The village graveyard is full. The next grave is dug in the field where you planted beans. The reeve, once the terror of your life, is reduced to begging you to help bury the dead. You refuse, not out of cruelty, but out of terror, because the fever moves too quickly. One day, a man is healthy, complaining about the price of salt. The next, he is burning with sweat, bleeding from the gums, babbling prayers or curses as he dies. And when he dies, the sickness does not die with him. It lingers. It waits. No one understands. The priests say it is God's wrath punishment for greed, for pride, for sins you can't even remember committing. The healers say it is bad air, or the influence of the stars, or perhaps, as one desperate old woman mutters, the vengeance of cats. You stop shaking hands. You stop sharing food. You cross yourself every time someone coughs. You are still not ready. The panic is everywhere. In the village, the old bonds begin to fray. Friends turn away from friends, mothers from children, husbands from wives. Fear poisons everything. Some pray harder. Others turn to superstition charms, spells, amulets. The healer burns handfuls of sage in every corner, muttering incantations she learned from her grandmother. A group of villagers, desperate for hope, march to the local church and sleep on the stone floor, convinced God will spare them if they humble themselves enough. It does not help. The priest, who once stood tall behind his altar, begins to stumble. He stops visiting the sick. One day, he is found dead in his bed, the skin of his neck dark as coal. Children are orphaned. The old die alone. Elric's mother weeps and prays, but her prayers are lost in the silence that follows. You want details? Here are the details. The Black Death is not poetic. It is a parade of agony. The victim feels fine then. Within hours, the fever arrives, raging, delirious. Next come the swellings, buboes grotesque, black and purple, hot to the touch, as if something monstrous is hatching beneath the skin. Sometimes the skin splits. Sometimes pus oozes, foul and sweet. Sometimes the victim coughs blood. There are no gentle deaths here. The pain is unspeakable. The priest cannot help. The doctor flees. No one wants to touch the body. Some victims die raving. Others slip into a coma. Most die within 3 days. If you are lucky, you do not catch it. If you are unlucky, you pray for a quick end. Elric's brother is the first in his family to fall. A healthy man, young and strong. By morning he is feverish. By afternoon, covered in buboes. By nightfall, nearly gone. His mother wails, but she cannot touch him. Elric sits by the door, paralyzed. Should he flee? Should he pray? Should he bury his brother before the body brings more death? The choices are impossible. He does what everyone does, waits, watches, hopes by dawn his brother is dead. They bury him in the garden, not daring to risk the crowded graveyard. His mother covers her face. Elric's hands shake for days, but the plague is not finished with them. The wealthy do not escape. The Lord's household is struck. The manor gates are closed, but the sickness slips through anyway, as if it were. Wind, servants die first, then the lady of the house. The Lord himself is seen, pale and frantic, riding for the city. No one knows if he makes it. The village healer, who tried so bravely to save everyone, finally succumbs. The last you see of her, she is burning a handful of rosemary, muttering prayers to saints whose names you cannot pronounce. The chickens stop laying. The cows wander, unmilked, into the woods. The fields are silent. The rules are gone. The church bells ring no more. The reeve has disappeared, or died, or run away. The baker's house is empty. The mill sits idle. The living avoid the dead. The dead outnumber the living. You stop keeping track of time. You stop keeping track of hope. For a while, the only sound in the village is the caw of crows and the soft sigh of wind through empty homes. Some try to run into the forest, 2 distant villages, anywhere but here. They carry the plague with them, unwittingly. The disease follows, swift and merciless. Others lock themselves inside, barricade their doors, refuse to let anyone in or out. Hunger is the only thing that breaks the silence, and it is just as relentless. You try not to think about the future. You try not to think at all. Where is God in this? Where are the saints? You watch as the most devout fall as swiftly as the most sinful. You wonder if this is truly judgment or simply chaos. Elric's mother, once a pillar of faith, weeps until there are no tears left. She whispers prayers, but her voice is hollow. One night, as the plague rages, she stands before the empty altar, demanding answers. There is only silence. Not everyone responds with despair. Some respond with madness. A group of flagellants passes through the village, men and women who beat themselves with whips. Convinced that only pain can appease God, they chant, bleed, collapse. Some die on the road, others simply move on, leaving only confusion behind. A few villagers turn to the woods, seeking the old gods, the forgotten rituals, the comfort of something older than the church. They return with herbs, with charms, with hope. Most are disappointed. Still, a stubborn few cling to the rituals, anything, to make sense of this new world. You've heard the whispers. It's the rats. It's the foreigners. It's the sin of the city. It's the bad air, the stars, the wrath of God. No one knows. All you know is that the rats are everywhere, now scurrying through empty barns, feasting on stores left behind, multiplying as the people die. Some try to kill them. Most simply give up. Elric stands in the field one evening, staring at the graves. His brother, his friends, the healer, even Beatrice, finally, who was not immune. He tries to remember what hope felt like. He tries to remember why people sang, why they danced, why they planted crops year after year, trusting that the earth would provide. Now, the only sound is the wind and the caw of the crows. He wonders if the sun will ever rise again on a world without sorrow. Eventually, the plague burns itself out, not from mercy, but from lack of victims. The survivors emerge, blinking in the strange new light, wondering what comes next. The village is a ghost of itself. The fields are untended. The houses are empty. The church doors hang open, the altar bare. Elric looks at his mother, at the handful of neighbors who remain, and wonders what kind of world will rise from the ashes. He is not ready, but he must go on. There is no comedy in watching your child die from buboes. But it happened often. It was ordinary. It was everywhere. It was history's cruelest teacher, a lesson written in blood and silence. For those who lived, there is only memory, and the question that lingers, will we ever be whole again? Dawn in the village is different now. There's no cockerel crowing, no laughter, no clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Instead, there is only silences, silence that presses on your skin, heavy as mourning clothes. In the world before the plague, A new day meant possibilities, a better harvest, a warmer hearth, a kinder fate. Now, it means something simpler. It means you're still here. This is not the silence of peace. It is the hush left behind by too many funerals and too few living to dig the graves. You, Elric, are alive. This fact is not a comfort. Let's speak plainly. The Black Death did not just steal. Lives it dismantled the architecture of the living. The survivors are not heroes. They are the ones who didn't die fast enough. The cost is measured not only in missing faces, but in the absences they leave behind. The fields are overgrown, the cottages abandoned, the air thick with the perfume of rot. You step outside and count the houses with smoke. There are fewer each day. The churchyard is a ragged quilt of fresh earth, hurriedly turned by the exhausted, the grief-stricken, or the simply numb. Some graves are marked with crude crosses, some with stones, many with nothing at all. A new routine emerges. Wake. Search for the living, bury the dead, repeat until you forget what else life was supposed to be. In the great shuffle of the social order, gravedigger is now the most stable job in town. Priests and peasants alike have taken to it. The old system of rites and rituals has crumbled under the weight of numbers. The priest, if he still lives, mutters a prayer over a pit so wide and deep it could swallow the village. You remember the early weeks, when each body was laid to rest with care. Prayers, tears, last words. But soon the pace of death outstrips compassion. The graves become mass graves pits, dug hastily, filled quickly, covered poorly. Sometimes bodies are simply left where they fell, the living too weak or afraid to approach. The stench is unimaginable, but it is also inescapable. Let's not be sentimental. Medieval Europe was not ready for this scale of death. Not in spirit, not in muscle, not in shovels. Local burial grounds filled up in weeks. Fields were commandeered, pastures turned into necropolises. No one keeps records. There is no time. Officials from the nearest town arrive one day, faces shrouded, voices muffled. They bring news of orders from the king quarantine, burn the infected houses, dig deeper graves. They offer platitudes, not help. They are gone by sunset. You realize no one is coming to save you. The world beyond the village is just as broken, or worse. Funerals are unrecognizable now. There is no processional, no gathering of neighbors to grieve and gossip and find meaning in the randomness of fate. Mourning is private. Sometimes it is secret. Sometimes it is abandoned altogether. The old women who once led the keening at gravesides are gone. The priest's voice is hoarse and trembling when it can be heard at all. Some families dig their own graves, too afraid to ask for help. Others leave bodies in doorways, hoping someone else will do the work. A village is a tapestry woven from habit and hope. Now the threads are snapped. The pattern unravels. At first, each death is a personal wound. Elric grieves for his brother, for Beatrice, for the healer whose hands once mended a cut finger with honey and a joke. But grief, like hunger, becomes background noise. You cannot afford to weep for everyone. You cannot name all the lost. You become numb, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The living develop a kind of armor. Jokes become darker. The laughter, when it comes, is jagged and brief. You realize that, in time, you may forget who you used to be. You fear this, but you let it happen. It's easier than hope. The clergy, once the center of village life, have mostly fled or fallen. The church door hangs open, the altar stripped of its ornaments. No one rings the bells. The icons stare blankly at the emptiness. Some priests try to maintain the old rituals. They walk from house to house, risking their lives to offer last rites. But as the death toll mounts, even the most devout waver. The spiritual contract feels broken. You gave your prayers, your tithes, your hope, yet the plague came anyway. A few preachers turned to fire and brimstone, blaming the survivors for imagined sins. Most simply disappear, as afraid and broken as the rest. Elric's mother clings to her beads, reciting prayers out of habit, not conviction. The comfort is hollow, but it is something to hold. The harvest is a disaster. With so many dead, there are not enough hands to work the land. Crops rot in the field. Livestock wander untended through the ruined streets. The famine that follows is both expected and cruel. For those who survive, food becomes as precious as memory. You scavenge abandoned cottages for grain, barter with what little you have. Watch for traveling merchants, though they are rare, and often bring only rumors, not relief. Winter looms, and the stores are empty. If there is a cruelty worse than death, it is abandonment. Children, orphaned by the plague, wander in packs, half wild, hungry, and afraid. Some are taken in by neighbors, but many are left to fend for themselves. You see them sometimes, small shadows darting between houses, clutching bits of bread or nothing at all. The village has always been a place where everyone knows everyone. Now, there are strangers among you ghosts, with eyes too old for their faces. Some disappear into the woods, never to be seen again. As the months drag on, memory becomes slippery. The faces of the lost blur together. You struggle to recall the sound of a particular laugh, the warmth of a hand, the timbre of a voice. You wonder if forgetting is a kind of mercy. Stories take on new importance. The survivors gather around fires, telling tales of the time before the plague, not just to entertain, but to remember, to insist that something once existed beyond this endless grieving. Elric's mother tells him the same story every night. How his father caught a trout with his bare hands, how the healer sang to her plants, how the festival of St. Crispin ended with a dance that lasted until dawn. Elric listens, but the images are fading. You start to question whether any of it was real. Not everyone dies in their beds. Some simply vanish. Driven by fear or madness, they leave the village in the night, seeking safety elsewhere. Some hope to find towns untouched by the plague. Others simply run, unable to bear the suffocating weight of shared grief. Most are never heard from again. Sometimes their bodies are found months later, far from home, anonymous in their final rest. Sometimes they survive, but become strangers, unrecognizable even to themselves. There are rumors of entire villages empty, doors swinging open, tables still set for meals that will never be eaten. The land is full of absences, with so few left. To tend the land, nature begins to move in. Weeds overrun the gardens, vines creep over thatched roofs. Wild animals, once timid, wander the lanes, foxes, wolves, boars. The world grows quieter, but also wilder. There is a strange beauty in the ruin, a reminder that life continues, even if it no longer recognizes you. Sometimes, at dusk, Elric stands in the empty fields and listens to the wind. It sounds almost like singing. For a moment, he wonders if the world is healing itself or simply forgetting its wounds. Amid the horror, small acts of kindness persist. A neighbor leaves bread at your door. Someone mends a torn shirt for an orphan. A stranger helps bury the dead. But there are also acts of despair. Some take their own lives, unable to bear the emptiness. Others turn to theft, or worse, driven by hunger or grief. You cannot judge them. There are no rules anymore, only survival. Let's slow down, breathe. What does it mean to survive the end of the world when no one remembers your name? Is survival merely the absence of death, or is it something more, a stubborn refusal to let go of memory, of meaning, of self? Elric wonders if he will be remembered, or if he too will become just another unmarked grave. Loneliness is the new plague. The survivors crave connection, but fear keeps them apart. You greet your neighbors from a distance, wave instead of embracing. Conversation is careful, as if words might carry the sickness. The village festival is cancelled, the church silent. You find comfort in small things, a patch of sunlight, the laughter of a child, a song remembered from happier times. It is not enough, but it is something. Every day feels like the end, but the world does not stop. The seasons turn, the sky shifts, from grey to blue and back again. You plant seeds, not because you believe they will grow, but because you must. Hope is a habit. You begin to rebuild, slowly, haltingly. The empty fields become your inheritance. In time, new faces, apart travelers, refugees, survivors from other places. The village begins to fill again, though it will never be what it was. Elric walks the lanes at dusk, remembering the names of the lost, whispering them like prayers. You realize that survival is not just endurance, but remembrance. Mass graves, empty fields, broken families, but also stories, laughter, the stubborn green of weeds pushing through stone. The world is changed, irrevocably, but it is not ended. You are still here. Let's step gingerly into the aftermath. By now, your world is half empty. The crows are fat, the fields are overgrown, and the village is quieter than a monk's confessional after a 3-day fast. You, Elric, have buried more friends than you can count, learned to ignore hunger pangs, and mastered the art of hoping for less. But something strange starts happening in these years after the first plague wave. Amidst the stench of mortality, people begin to paint, sing, and carve, obsessed with skeletons, grim reapers, and the raw absurdity of death. Where faith and fear have failed, art steps in, splattering bones across the walls and making everyone rich. And poor, noble, and peasant dance together, if only in metaphor. Welcome to the Danse Macabre, the most on-brand medieval meme in history. You'd think that mass death would kill creativity, but in 14th century Europe, it does the opposite. Churches, town halls, and even the walls of your neighbor's barn are suddenly covered in a grim parade. Skeletons leading kings, bishops, merchants, and peasants by the hand. There is no escaping this choreography, in paint, wood, or stained glass. The message is clear. Death is the only equalizer. But the real joke, you can laugh at it. You and your neighbors begin to find a dark humor in it all. Someone carves a skull and crossbones on the village well. The miller's wife sings a nursery rhyme about skeletons plucking children from their beds. Elric tries to rhyme turnip with tombstone. He fails. But nobody minds. For the first time in months, laughter rings out, thin and brittle, but real. Let's pause to ask, Why did the Black Death inspire this gruesome artistry? Why? Not just rebuild and try to forget, because forgetting is impossible. Death is everywhere. There's no sense pretending otherwise, so people invite it in turning terror into pageantry. The Danse Macabre becomes a way to mock what cannot be defeated. If death is coming for everyone, might as well dance. Entertainment, too, takes a morbid turn. Traveling players perform morality plays, acting out battles between virtues and vices, saints and sinners, skeletons and the living. Villagers watch as death, dressed in rags and bones, drags away a greedy merchant, or a pompous noble cheers erupt when the corpse gets up and does a jig. In some towns, there are processions, masked dancers wind through the streets, clattering, bones, banging drums, inviting onlookers to join their number. Everyone is welcome. There are no class distinctions in this conga line. Even church sermons lean in, delivering reminders that life is fleeting, fortunes are fragile, and your best bet is to be right with God, or at least learn to laugh before your fertilizer. Artists, scribes, and woodcutters memorialize the tragedy and absurdity of the plague years in illuminated manuscripts. Margins are full of dancing skeletons, grinning skulls, and priests tripping over tombstones. Even Bibles get a glope now decorated with the skeletal equivalent of emojis. Why? Because art, for peasants and nobles alike, is therapy. If you can't beat death, at least you can give it a sense of humor. Some villagers find solace in carving little wooden memento moritini reminders to remember you must die. They're traded like charms or worn around the neck. It sounds bleak, but in a way, it's oddly comforting. If everyone's number is up, there's no point worrying about yours all the time. One autumn, Elric stumbles into a neighboring town and finds a church wall freshly painted. A skeleton leads a king. A knight, a merchant, and a peasant, each holding hands, each looking equally surprised by their situation. The inscription underneath reads, "As you are, so once was I. As I am, so you will be." Elric stands for a long time, reading and rereading. He laughs a short, surprised sound and then begins to cry. Not out of fear, but relief. He is not alone in his sorrow or his mortality. When he returns home, he tells his mother. She laughs too, then asks him to describe every bone in detail. They fall asleep lighter than they have in months. Music changes, too. Lullabies are full of warnings. Children are told to sleep tight, lest the skeletons tap on the window. New songs arise, bittersweet and beautiful, with verses about plagues, prayers, and the persistence of hope. In the evenings, villagers gather in the fading light, singing together. The sound is rough, sometimes off-key, but stronger than silence. It's not celebration, it's defiance. If this sounds odd, look around. Whenever life is hardest, humor follows. In the 21st century, we tweet memes about disaster, write ironic reviews of world-ending events, and cope with chaos through gallows humor. The Danse Macabre is the original. Viral content tart as a collective deep breath, a wink in the face of oblivion. Let that settle for a moment. Sometimes, laughter is what gets us through. Death does not end the story. It forces a new chapter. The peasants who paint skeletons on the walls are not giving up. They are holding on to what matters: community, memory, and the courage to find joy. Even when the world is falling apart, Elric sits by the hearth, turning a carved skull in his hand. He asks himself if he will ever feel safe again. His mother tells him, "Safety is a story we tell each other, like hope." He nods, uncertain but comforted. As the years pass, the Danse Macabre spreads from town to town. More walls, more paintings, more plays. People begin to gather again, cautiously sometimes for funerals, sometimes just to watch the parade. The dead are still dead, but the living have reclaimed a little joy, a little meaning. Children play in the graveyard, hopping from stone to stone. Old women tell jokes at the well. The world is not healed, but it is moving again, one hesitant, hopeful step at a time. One winter's night, a group of players arrives in the village, offering a new performance. They wear skeleton masks, whitewashed and grinning, and invite the villagers to join them in the square. At first, people hesitate, remembering loss, fearing laughter. Then someone, Elric, perhaps steps forward, accepts a mask, and joins the line. By night's end, everyone is dancing, spinning in the firelight. The masks bobbing, the laughter ringing. It is not a dance of denial, but one of survival. The village, for the first time in a long time, feels almost whole. The Danse Macabre will survive the centuries, etched in stone, ink, and memory. It will remind generations that all are mortal, all are equal, and all must face the end. But it will also remind them that, in the shadow of death, there is always room for art, for laughter, and for a final, defiant step. The plague may have taken many things, but not the human need to create meaning, not the stubborn, beautiful urge to make the darkness dance. Imagine waking to a morning that almost feels normal. The sun climbs above fields patched with wildflowers and weeds. A few remaining villagers shuffle to the well, and the silence is different now, no longer funereal, but curious. If you listen closely, you can hear the beginnings of new routines. In this world after the world, the worst has happened. The Black Death has receded, leaving fewer graves unfilled than hearts left aching. But life, stubborn as a weed, is returning. Elric rubs the sleep from his eyes and realizes the crows are arguing with the sparrows again. That, at least, feels familiar. Let's not sugarcoat it. The aftermath is not a golden age. Grief is a constant companion. But grief isn't the only thing that sticks. So does relief. If you've lived through the plague, you carry a complicated gratitude. Every breath is a miracle, every meal a small feast. Even a bowl of thin barley soup is a reminder that you are somehow still here. There are moments of laughter, guilt-ridden but precious. Sometimes you catch yourself humming a tune from childhood, surprised by how easily joy returns. However, briefly, there is no forgetting, but there is forward motion. Historians will tell you that Europe lost somewhere between a third and a half of its population to the plague. That means more empty houses than occupied ones. In some places, whole villages vanished. In others, survivors find themselves neighbors with ghosts and wild dogs. But here's the upside. For the first time in centuries, peasants like Elric aren't fighting for scraps. Land that once belonged to the dead is suddenly up for grabs. Fields that were once crowded and contentious now sit open, waiting for new hands and new hope. In the years before the plague, you were lucky if you could afford a strip of land to grow onions. Now, landowners are practically begging survivors to farm, offering better deals, lower rents, even freedom from some feudal obligations. A peasant's labor is precious currency, and everyone knows it. With so many dead, the rules have changed. The old lords, if they survived at all, are desperate to fill empty cottages and fields. Some try to force survivors back into the same old serfdom, but many fail. Labor is scarce, and for the first time in memory, a peasant can say no to a lord's demands. Elric hears stories from travelers. Wages are rising in distant towns. Serfs are leaving for cities, and the old rules are breaking down. He's even heard of whole villages where peasants have organized and demanded new freedoms. Sometimes it works. Sometimes lords answer rebellion with violence. But the seeds of change are there. You can feel it in the way people look, the reeve in the eye now. Not with fear, but with the quiet boldness of survival. The church, too, is changed. Many priests died, some fled, and those who remain have lost their grip on moral certainty. Services are shorter, prayers more desperate, and new saints are venerated almost overnight. For a time, the church tries to reassert itself, blaming the plague on sin and demanding repentance. But the survivors have seen too much. They pray because it helps, not because they expect miracles. Governments attempt to restore order by passing laws to freeze wages, forbid migration, and keep the old systems running. The Ordinance of Labourers in England, for instance, tries to force people to work for pre-plague wages. But good luck enforcing rules in a half-empty land, especially when everyone knows you need them more than they need you. Let's talk about economics, peasant style. Suddenly, if you have two strong arms and a willingness to work, you can bargain. You can choose where to live, what to plant, and, sometimes, who to marry. The price of land goes down. The price of labor goes up. Elric is approached by a merchant from the city, offering coin in exchange for help replanting an abandoned orchard. He considers leaving, but the ties of Homegrave's memories and that familiar muddy field keep him anchored. Still, he knows he has options. For the first time, the future is not a closed door but a forked path. Children born after the plague grow up in a changed world. They inherit not just property, but possibility. Where once every generation repeated the same story, plow, pay, pray, die, now there are rumors of peasants buying freedom, opening shops, sending sons to university. It's not a revolution, but it is a shift. The hierarchy is not gone, but it is wobbly. Nobles grumble, merchants thrive, cities expand, hungry for workers. The gap between the surviving poor and the surviving rich narrows if only for a generation. The heart, too, is changed by the plague. Marriages are arranged with astonishing speed, if only because life feels fragile and short. Widows and widowers pair up. Children are born into homes crowded with ghosts, and every new birth feels like a small act of rebellion. Elric meets a woman named Mordchi, lost her whole family but survived. Together they plant potatoes, share stories, and begin, hesitantly, to dream. At first, neither trusts the future, but slowly the fields are tilled, the roof is patched, and laughter creeps back into the house. In this new era, faith is mixed with doubt and creativity. Old customs are revived, new ones invented. Villagers light candles for the dead, but also for the living. Festivals resume, but now every mask, every bonfire, every song is tinged with memory. Stories of miraculous survivors, of signs and omens, circulate like currency. Some say the world is ending, others that it is only just beginning. You take comfort wherever you can find it. With fewer people to farm, forests reclaim the edges of the fields. Wolves and wild boars roam where children once played. There is danger, but also beauty. The land heals, even as its people do. Wildflowers bloom in the meadows, deer graze in abandoned orchards. For those who survive, the world is both emptier and richer. Elric finds comfort in these signs, the quiet resilience of nature, the unplanned return of wildness. He gathers berries, listens to the birds, and feels hope stir. If you want a modern parallel, think of a financial crash or a pandemic lead 10 times worse. Imagine waking to find your world shattered, your routines upended, and suddenly, for the first time, opportunity blooming in the cracks. For peasants like Elric, it's terrifying, but also exhilarating. The world is off balance, and for once, you might just land on your feet. Of course, not everyone benefits equally. Some villagers never recover, some families disappear entirely. There are still taxes, still lords, still the hard realities of hunger, cold, and war. But the old order has been shaken. Change is slow, but it is real, and for those with the courage or desperation to seize it. The aftermath of the plague is not just survival, but the beginning of something new. The bells ring again. The market returns, tentative but real. Children play in the lanes, laughter, mingling with the memory of morning. Weddings are celebrated, fields are planted, songs are sung. You learn to carry both sorrow and hope side by side, like twins. There are days when the past feels heavier than the future, and others when you almost forget how much you've lost, but you keep going. Elric stands at the edge of the field, looking out at the horizon. The world is not what it was. It never will be again. But maybe, just maybe, it will be enough. Let's begin with a moment of clarity. Peasants, for all their reputation of docility, mid-wrestling, and general acceptance of whatever fate or the reeve throws at them, do not always go quietly into that good night, especially not after surviving plague, famine, and a lifetime of noble imposed taxes that would make a hedge fund manager blush. Sometimes, after the end of the world, people decide that maybe, just maybe, they deserve better. So, buckle up, because the next act in this saga is a riot. Literally, picture England, 1381. The fields have started to fill again, villages are rebuilding, and there's just enough food for hope to grow, but also just enough memory for anger to simmer. Because guess what? The lords, facing labor shortages and dwindling incomes, have decided that the best way to recover from mass death is to squeeze the survivors even harder. Wages, which have been rising because nobody wants to spend their one precious life weeding someone else's onions, are frozen by law. Taxes are hiked to pay for royal debts and disastrous wars. Serfdom, the system that ties you to your lord's land like a cow to a stakeus, being enforced with new viciousness. Peasants everywhere are muttering. Elric, now older and scarred, is among them. You can only be patient so long before your back snaps from more than just digging. Before the famous revolts, most resistance is small. A laborer demands higher pay and walks away when denied. A group of villagers hides their best grain, lying to the taxman. A village refuses to send men for forced road work, making excuses about fevers or wolves. There are songs about cruel lords and sassy jokes about tax collectors whispered after dark. But as oppression increases, these small acts become a tide, and then a spark. In 1381, the King's Council, led by people who haven't touched dirt in generations, enacts yet another poll tax, demanding every adult in the kingdom pay. The collection is harsh, the collectors are brutal, and suddenly, The entire country is simmering like an overfilled cauldron. It doesn't take long for the pot to boil over. In Essex, a tax collector makes the mistake of manhandling a villager. The locals fight back. Word spreads. Soon, villagers across the south and east are refusing to pay. In some places, crowds gather, weapons in hand. What happens next? A revolution sort of Wat Tyler, a name destined for both glory and tragedy, steps forward in Kent. He's not a noble, not a general just, a blacksmith with more spine than sense. With the preacher John Ball at his side, a man with radical notions about equality in sermons, spicier than anything in the king's kitchen. Tyler rallies thousands. They march on London, fueled by hunger, outrage, and a sense that history might be bendable. For a few days, the city teeters. The rebels enter London, torching mansions, freeing prisoners, demanding justice. The king, a boy named Richard II, meets with them surrounded by nervous lords. Tyler, bold as a fox in a henhouse, lays out demands: end serfdom, lower taxes, equality before the law. The king promises everything, smiles and nods. Tyler is murdered in a scuffle. The rebels, leaderless, are cut down or scattered by the king's men. The old order reasserts itself harshly. Bloodily. Revolution, it seems, is not for peasants. But don't be fooled by the ending. The revolt fails publicly, yet something cracks. The fear that once kept peasants silent is forever changed. Lords, frightened by how close they came to losing control, are more cautious. Some quietly begin to treat laborers better, to grant more freedom, to negotiate. Serfdom, that ancient chain, starts to loosen. Over the coming decades, more peasants buy or claim their freedom, move to towns, or simply disappear from the rolls. And everywhere, stories of Wat Tyler and the rebels circulate. In the corners of taverns, around fires, mothers hush children to sleep with tales of brave men who faced the king and dared to ask, why? Elric, by now old but stubborn as a church door, does not join the rebellion in London. But in his own village, he stands up to the reeve for the first time in his life, refusing to hand over an unfair share of barley. He's not alone. Neighbors, who once kept heads down, stand beside him. The reeve blusters, but the village stands. For the first time, the balance tips not with swords, but with stubbornness. The world doesn't change overnight, but feels something shift. He finds himself sleeping better, dreams less haunted by lords, and more by laughter. If you're wondering why peasants, after all this suffering, don't simply overthrow their masters for good, it's worth remembering. Power is sticky. Armies, laws, and tradition are all on the side of the lords. Most peasants are too tired, too hungry, too isolated to coordinate. And when rebellion does erupt, it is often crushed with a brutality that sends a lesson for generations. But every small act matters. Every refusal, every escape to the city, every new life carved from the cracks of the old system. These are the revolutions that count, quiet but enduring. The world will not remember most of these names. History loves a king, a knight, a battle, and the peasants are often footnotes. But footnotes keep the page from blowing away. What changes in the wake of these uprisings is not just law, but the imagination of what is possible. A peasant, seeing that the king is just a boy in a fancy hat, that lords bleed and panic like anyone else, discovers a new sense of agency. The rebellion may be crushed, but the questions it raised never go away. Consider this: in any century, those at the bottom of the pyramid have the most to gain and the least to lose by asking why. Whether it's a medieval riot or a modern strike, every protest is a crack in the facade of inevitability. History rarely changes in a day, but over years, centuries, the weight of those cracks can topple even the sturdiest towers. For Elric and his kin, the aftermath of rebellion is bittersweet. There are new freedoms, but also new fears. The lords remain, taxes return, and war never seems far away. But now, there's something different, a whisper, a memory, a seed of hope that, if watered by courage, might someday grow into something unrecognizable. Justice stood still, the world is slow to listen, so what happens next when death returns? In the form of armies or taxes, but with a doctor's mask and a pouch of leeches. The fight for dignity, it turns out, is only just beginning. Let's take a breath. You've survived war, famine, and the worst pandemic in European history. Surely, at this point, you've earned some competent healthcare, maybe even a compassionate bedside manner and some actual advice that won't leave you feeling more cursed than when you arrived. But, dear peasant, you live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is part science, part witchcraft, and all hazard. If you get sick, be it from the plague, a stubbed toe, or melancholy of the spleen, prepare to be poked, bled, smoked, or exorcised. Welcome to medieval healthcare, a place where optimism is fatal and garlic is more valuable than gold. Let's imagine you wake up with a mysterious swelling and a fever. Your first instinct might be to consult the village healer, an old woman with too many cats and a suspicious collection of dried roots. She'll listen to your symptoms, squint at the sky, and hand you a poultice that smells like last week's laundry. If that doesn't work, she might recite a prayer or try a charm, because you never know when a demon is responsible for your rash. If you're feeling ambitious, you might send for the town doctor. Now, doctors in 1347 come into flavors. University-trained physicians who quote Aristotle and carry books they can't actually read, and barber surgeons whose main qualification is owns a sharp knife. The university type will diagnose you using astrological charts, check your urine against a handy color wheel, brown, bad, blue, call the priest, and then recommend a diet of bread, wine, and boiled chicken. The barber surgeon, meanwhile, just wants to know which limb you're willing to lose first. One of the cornerstones of medieval medicine is bloodletting. The theory is simple. Your body contains 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. When they're out of balance, you get sick. Solution: remove some blood, or, if you're feeling adventurous, some phlegm. Leeches are the medieval doctor's best friend. They're applied to everything from headaches to heartbreak. Got the plague? Leeches. Gout? Leeches. Chronic ennui? Leeches. Sometimes, a young apprentice will place a bowl beneath your arm, slice a vein, and watch with scientific detachment as you grow paler. If you survive, you get a congratulatory onion. If you faint, you're told to drink wine and walk it off. Not all remedies are terrifying. The local healer's garden is filled with sage, thyme, rosemary, and garlic. These are used in teas, poultices, and salves for everything from stomach aches to demonic possession. Elderflower is used for fevers, willow bark for pain, and nettles for blood purification, i.e., make you itch so badly you forget what hurt in the first place. On good days, these treatments help. On bad days, you learn that natural is not always synonymous with effective. worried about catching the next wave of plague? Stuff your pockets with fragrant herbs, light a stick of incense, and wear a charm blessed by the village. Priest, medieval medicine relies on sensory defense. If it smells bad, it must be healthy. Astrologers, meanwhile, consult star charts before scheduling surgeries or letting blood. If Mars is in retrograde, the only safe option is to stay in bed and hope for rain. If the disease is really dire, the city might send a plague doctor. He will arrive dressed in an ankle-length robe, thick gloves, glass goggles, and most famously a beaked mask stuffed with herbs and spices. The beak is supposed to filter out miasma, the bad air believed to spread disease. To you, he looks like an overgrown, menacing canary. Children hide, adults cross themselves. Everyone hopes he'll just keep walking. The plague doctor's actual treatments are limited. Incense, bloodletting, and quarantine. He'll poke the sick with a stick, scribbled notes in Latin, and then shuffle away before anyone asks him to cure something. Elric, our ever-resilient peasant, once came down with what he called the bone chill, a fever and aches that laid him out for days. The healer gave him garlic, vinegar, and a firm slap. If you survive the slap, she said, you'll survive the fever. Elric did survive, though he suspects it was the vinegar, not the blow, that chased the illness away. Years later, he still winces when someone suggests a little folk medicine. If you're truly desperate, you might try the local hospitaler charitable house run by monks or nuns. These institutions are mostly places to die in peace rather than recover. Patients lie to a bed, breathing each other's illnesses and praying that the soup is fresh. The nuns provide prayer, basic nursing, and the occasional herbal remedy. The monks record your symptoms, offer last rites, and dig your grave if things don't improve. Germ theory is centuries away. Hand washing is optional. The only thing contagious is fatalism. Not feeling yourself. Hearing voices. Medieval Europe has a cure. Exorcism. Mental illness is poorly understood, often attributed to sin, demonic possession, or too much melancholy. The treatment, confession, prayer, fasting, and, if all else fails, being dunked in cold water or chained to a wall until you feel better. Sympathy is in short supply. Survival is prioritized over sensitivity. If you're lucky, the village healer will give you a cup of poppy tea and tell you to sleep it off. If you're not, you become another ghost in the parish records. Worried about hygiene? Medieval sanitation is, as we've discussed, a work in progress. Wells are close to latrines, streams double as laundries and sewers, and nobody's quite sure whether bathing opens your pores to disease or washes it away. The best advice: avoid the sick, don't drink the river water, and pray your immune system is made of iron. Despite the chaos, medieval medicine isn't all snake oil and superstition. Some remedies work purely by chance or accumulated wisdom. Honey helps wounds. Garlic fights infection. Poppy seeds ease pain. But these are exceptions. For most, healing is a matter of luck, not science. Every recovery is a miracle, every death a lesson. Let that sink in dusty herbs, sour wine, leeches wriggling in a jar. Would you survive, knowing that the doctor's best advice is wait and pray? Would you trust a barber with your life, a monk with your sanity, a healer with her secret recipes? Elric asks himself this every winter, when the coughs grow deep and the wind howls through the cracks. He counts his blessings, his scars, and the friends he's lost to bad luck or worse. Medicine in this world Survival is not a right, it's a gamble. Feeling smug with your antibiotics and paramedics. Good. Remember, every pill, every clean hospital bed, every masked doctor is a miracle built on centuries of trial, error, and unrecorded suffering. Next time you grumble about a copay, think of Elric's slap and vinegar therapy, and thank your lucky stars. Despite the odds, peasants innovate. They pass down recipes, experiment with new herbs, and learn from their mistakes. Some knowledge will last, some will be discarded as nonsense. But the urge to heal, to help, to survive this remains. Stubborn as a weed, up medieval medicine is proof that humanity will try anything to cheat death sentence. Magic, prayer, or pure stubbornness. Sometimes it works. More often, it doesn't. But the effort, the ingenuity, the hope, these are what carry us through. And when all else fails, at least you can always blame the humors. Let's begin with an uncomfortable truth. Medieval history, as told by the winners, is mostly written by and for men. Kings, knights, monks, even the infamous tax collectors. These are the names etched in parchment and stone. But if you want to understand what it actually meant to survive the 14th century, you need to look beneath the dust and heraldry. You need to follow the quiet footsteps of the women, the ones carrying the water, the grief, the secrets, and sometimes the pitchforks. Elric's world, like every peasant's, is shaped as much by the hands of mothers, wives, sisters, and daughters, as by any noble's command, and yet their stories are the hardest to find. Imagine a typical village day. The men are in the fields, arguing about soil and the reeve's breath. Meanwhile, women are everywhere, tending fires, baking bread, hauling water, scrubbing children, spinning wool, mending clothes, feeding animals, brewing ale, healing wounds, and whispering the latest gossip. If you think this sounds like multitasking, you'd be right, except it's not a lifestyle hack, it's survival. For most peasant women, rest is a myth, and leisure is an insult. Work is unending, invisible, and underappreciated. Maud, who married Elric after the plague, wakes before dawn and often sleeps after everyone else. She knows exactly how much grain is left, which herbs can cure a cough, and how to read the weather by the smell of the wind. In public, she is quiet. In private, she is the engine of the household. Life for a woman is marked by cycles: birth, marriage, childbirth, mourning. Most girls are married by their teens, often to men they barely know. For some, love is possible. For many, it's an afterthought. Childbirth is both hope and terror. Midwives are trusted, but even their hands cannot guarantee survival. Women bleed, fever, and die at rates that would terrify a modern reader. Each birth is a gamble on the baby, on the mother, on the mercy of Saint Dot. Maud has buried 2 children, each marked with a stone and a song. She weeps, but always in private. Grief is a familiar companion, never allowed to stay too long lest it sap the strength needed for tomorrow. In a world before hospitals, midwives are the medical authorities for most women. They know when to push, when to pray, which herbs ease pain, which teas coax stubborn babies into the world. They're also counselors, judges, and keepers of secrets. Sometimes they're scapegoats, accused when something goes wrong, praised when a miracle occurs. Their knowledge is practical, earned through years of watching, listening, and learning. Some of it will be lost to history. Some will become the roots of modern medicine. All of it is survival. Now comes the danger. In times of fear, uncertainty, or unexplained illness, suspicion blooms like mold after rain. Women who know too much about herbs, about childbirth, about life and death are vulnerable, which is a label that sticks to the lonely, the outspoken, the unlucky. Accusations are rarely about magic. They are about power, who has it, who threatens it, who gets punished for challenging it. After the plague, witch trials are still rare in England, but seeds are being planted. Midwives who lose a mother in childbirth may be blamed. Women who speak their mind or heal with unapproved herbs may be whispered about. A child's fever, a bad harvest, a cow's sudden death, these are invitations for suspicion. Maud knows how to keep her head down. She teaches her daughter to do the same. For many women, survival is about being overlooked and threatening, indispensable, never drawing the wrong kind of attention. They learn to move quietly, speak softly, and hide their intelligence behind obedience. But there are others women who refuse to disappear. Every village has stories. Of a widow who lived alone and cursed the Reeves cattle. Of a girl who healed wounds with just a touch. Of a grandmother who knew the secrets of the forest. Some become legends, feared and respected in equal measure. Others are chased out, their names spoken only in warnings. These stories persist for centuries, shaping the village's imagination. Sometimes they become cautionary tales, sometimes sources of inspiration. Elric remembers Hilda, his Kazona, woman who never married, who lived on the edge of the woods and knew the name of every plant. When the fever swept the village, she treated the sick with teas and poultices. Most recovered, some did not. One winter, after a particularly harsh season, a child died suddenly. The whispers started. The Reeve came, demanding answers. Hilda stood in the doorway, unafraid. "I am not a witch," she said, "but if you drive me out, you'll be the next to fall ill." No one ever dared cross her again. Hilda survived, but at a price. Solitude. Women's survival is not only about avoiding notice, it's about building alliances. The washing well is a center of gossip, friendship, and mutual aid. When a birth goes wrong, women gather. When a harvest fails, they share scraps. In private, they tell stories, trade remedies, and watch out for one another. It's not always harmonious. Jealousies flare, rumors fly, but the network endures. Without it, no one makes it through the winter. Despite laws and customs designed to keep women powerless, they find ways to influence their world. Some manage household accounts, negotiate with neighbors, or run family businesses in their husband's absence. Others act as go-betweens, mediating disputes or delivering messages. A few, through wit or luck, become indispensable to lords or priests, wielding real, if unofficial authority, in times of crisis. Women's roles expand, caring for the sick, leading prayers, burying the dead. When men die in war or plague, it is often women who hold the village together. For some, survival means blending in. For others, it means becoming a legend. Some are remembered in songs, others only in whispers. But every woman who endures through labor, loss, invisibility, or defiance leaves a mark. Maud, for her part, survives by keeping secrets and tending the living. Hilda survives by daring the world to challenge her. Both teach their daughters the art of survival, when to be quiet, when to speak, when to run, and when to stand your ground. Some women never make it. Their names are lost, but their stories linger in the bones of the village. If you think any of this sounds distant, look closer. The burdens, the alliances, the whispered warnings all still exist in the shadows of the modern world. Women everywhere carry more than their share, bear more blame, fight harder to be heard. But they also survive sometimes by being invisible, sometimes by being unforgettable. At night, Maud sits by the fire, telling her daughter stories of clever girls, strong mothers, and wise women who outwitted death itself. She warns of jealousy and pride, but also of the power in knowing when to listen and when to speak. She ends each night with a prayer, not just for safety, but for the strength to survive another day, another winter, another rumor. Let that sink in. Some survived by becoming shadows, others by casting them. Either way, they shaped a world that did its best to forget the man still failed. Night falls in the medieval village like a velvet curtain, heavy with the scent of peat smoke, mud, and dreams. After a day spent chasing the sun across fields and fretting over crops, after the last ember in the hearth is banked, the world becomes very small. It is you, your family, and the shadows huddled together under a thatched roof. The noise and danger of the day slip away, and you are left with a single, vital question: can you rest? The short answer: it depends. Because for a medieval peasant, sleep is as much a luxury as cheese, as sacred as mass, and as unpredictable as the weather. There is no electric light, no digital clock, no late-night doom-scrolling. Darkness is total, and sleep comes in fits and starts. Most peasants practice segmented sleep, 2 distinct blocks of slumber, broken by a quiet hour in the middle of the night. You drift off soon after sunset, rise for an hour or two around midnight, then return to bed until dawn. What do you do in that in-between time? Some pray, some tend the fire or check on the animals, some share quiet talk or secrets. Others, more adventurous, slip from bed for a visit to neighbors, sometimes find comfort in each other's company. The night is full of small, silent negotiations. If you wake and find the world still and gentle, you count yourself lucky. Forget king-sized mattresses. Most families share a bed or a pile of straw, pressed together for warmth. The youngest squeeze into the middle, the oldest claim the edges, and everyone negotiates the unwelcome visits of fleas, lice, and the occasional field mouse. There are no pajamas, just whatever tunic you wore during the day. And maybe, if you're lucky, a blanket that doesn't smell of damp. Elic. Maud and their surviving children nest together like puppies. If someone snores, you nudge them. If someone cries out in a dream, you shush and comfort. The darkness is absolute, broken only by moonlight or the flicker of a dying ember. There is music, too. Mothers sing old songs to soothe children, lullabies about sheep, saints, or the ever-present danger lurking outside. Wolves howl in the distance. Owls call from the woods, and the wind rattles the shutters. Each sound is a reminder. You are small, but not alone. Children cling to these songs, carrying them into adulthood. Elric remembers the tune his mother sang about a fox stealing hens, equal parts warning and reassurance. Maud sings it now, her voice softer but just as steady. To a peasant, dreams are more than stray thoughts. They are messages, sometimes from God, sometimes from the restless dead, sometimes from a belly too full or too empty of cabbage. People believe that dreams can predict the future or reveal hidden truths. If you dream of water, beware floods. If you dream of bread, a good harvest may come. Sister Agnes, yes, still with us in rumor, if not in person, was famous for her dreams. She once predicted a neighbor's cow would give birth to twins, and was right. After that, no one doubted her visions, even when they involved dancing saints and talking sheep. In a world of relentless work and uncertainty, Sleep is more than a biological need. It is an act of hope, even defiance. Every morning you wake. You've survived another night, escaped the spirits, the wolves, the cold, the fear. Some nights, the rest is shallow. Hunger twists your belly. Nightmares chase you from your bed, or you lie awake, listening to the rain leaking through the roof. Other nights, the sleep is deep and dreamless, a gift from exhaustion, or perhaps a small mercy from the saints. Not everyone, of course. Babies and the elderly sleep the most. Women often sleep least, rising before dawn to stoke the fire and prepare breakfast. During times of war, sickness, or famine, sleep is fleeting and fragile. Some villagers take turns standing watch, eyes straining in the dark for danger. Elric remembers the year after the plague, when every shadow seemed a threat. He'd rise in the night to check the door, the animals, the silence itself. Rest was earned, not guaranteed. Without candles for every room, the village grows dark quickly. Families gather by the hearth, sharing stories or quiet conversation. The heat is a comfort, and the flames hypnotic. When the fire dies down, so do voices. Some say a prayer, tracing a cross in the air before sleep. Others simply listen to the wind, to the breathing of those beside them, to the slow settling of the house. Let that sink in how precious peace feels when it's so easily shattered. Night is not without its terrors. Peasants fear the supernatural, a spirit at the window, a demon on the chest, a sign of bad luck. Sleep paralysis is explained as a night hag, dreams of falling as omens of sickness. People tell stories of lost souls wandering the lanes, seeking rest they never found in life. If someone wakes screaming, the family soothes them, then spits 3 times for luck. If a nightmare lingers, you ask the healer for a charm, or the priest for a blessing. You might think your modern insomnia is unique, but medieval villagers know it well, though their sleeplessness is less about deadlines and more about the wolf at the door, literal or figurative. Still, the desire is universal. Just a few hours of rest, safe and undisturbed. If you sleep well, you count your blessings. If you don't, you hope for tomorrow. In a world so harsh, rest is a gift. It's the one place where all are equal. The rich snore, the poor dream, the grieving find comfort, if only for a few hours. Maybe that's why, centuries later, we still cherish our beds, our lullabies, our moments of peace. Elric, old now, lies awake some nights, listening to his family breathe. He knows each sound by heart. It's a reminder that, even after all the world's endings, there is something soft and sacred in the simple act of sleep. So yeah, breathe that indust hay and hope. The village sleeps, and for a moment, the world is at peace. Night has fallen on the village, as it has 1,000 times before. But tonight, the darkness feels thicker, slower, as if the world is holding its breath. Inside a small cottage patched with old wood and older memories, Elric sits by the hearth, his hands folded in his lap, staring into the flickering red light. There is little left of the boy who once chased geese in the rain, or of the young man who swung a hoe with more optimism than sense. Now, there is just a tired old man, bones aching, heart quieter than it used to be. He listens to Maud's gentle breathing in the bed behind him, to the crackle of the fire, to the sigh of the wind through the chinks in the wall. He remembers the long sweep of his life, not with bitterness, not quite with joy, but with a weary sort of wonder. Elric never made history. No one from the city ever wrote his name. He never led a revolt, never met a king, never did more than hope, endure, and keep moving forward. His story is one of millions, stitched together with ordinary days and nights, shaped by the long shadow of catastrophe and the slow work of survival. He remembers the famine, the bone-deep ache in his stomach, the thinness of his mother's face as she scraped the last of the flour from the bin. He remembers the year of the plague, the graves dug in frozen ground, the prayers whispered in the dark. He remembers the sound of Maud singing, the feel of a child's hand in his own, the cold bite of winter mornings, and the sweet heaviness of harvest afternoons. None of this will be written down. There will be no songs about Elric, no statues, no saints' days in his honor. He lived and loved and lost quietly. Tonight he weighs his regrets. The times he said nothing when he should have spoken, the times he spoke when silence would have been kinder. The years spent fearing the Lord's taxes, the reeve's anger, the next bad harvest. He thinks of friends gone to war, never to return, of brothers and sisters lost to the fever, of dreams unchased, promises unkept, little betrayals and small mercies dot. Yet for every sorrow there is a moment of comfort. Maud's laughter on the first day of spring, the warmth of the sun on his back, the surprise of an unexpected gifter, loaf of bread left at his door, a handful of wild strawberries, the neighbor's cat curling up at his feet. He remembers the worst nights, too, but also the way morning always came. Eventually, Elric's children are grown now, scattered across villages and towns, some thriving, some simply surviving. They do not come home tonight. Distance, work, the hard logic of peasant life keep them away. He is not angry. He knows the world demands everything from the young. He wonders what, if anything, will remain of him. Maybe a song half remembered, maybe a field that grows better for having been turned by his hands. Maybe nothing at all he is at peace with. This history is made by the invisible, by the hands that sew, by the backs that break, by the hearts that keep loving, even when there's no reason to hope. Maud stirs in her sleep, mumbling something about soup and geese. Elric smiles, the corners of his mouth turning up, and feels a flicker of gratitude she is still here, the one steady presence through every storm. He remembers the first night they slept side by side, the first time she pressed a cold hand to his forehead, the way she kept their world together with patience and stubbornness. He wishes, suddenly, that he had told her more often how much she meant to him. He leans over, kisses her hair, whispers the words, just in case. He settles back, closing his eyes. Sleep creeps over him in slow waves. He dreams not of the hard days, but of green fields that never failed, of friends alive again, of sons and daughters gathered at a table, of music and laughter and sunlight that never ends. He dreams of a village untouched by war, by hunger, by grief. A place where everyone has enough, where work is honest but not cruel, where no one goes nameless to the grave. He dreams of being remembered not by history, but by those who loved him. However briefly, as the fire burns down, Elric's breathing slows. Maud wakes, sits beside him, and takes his hand. They say nothing, there is nothing left to say. The quiet is full, not empty. She feels the last shiver run through him, the gentle settling of his body, the peace that comes when a long struggle ends. She weeps not loudly, but with the dignity of someone who has seen too much sorrow to believe in easy answers. She waits until dawn, holding his hand before calling the neighbors. She whispers his name once, twice, then lets it go. Let that sink in. Elric lived, loved, and died, and no one remembered, except Maud, except the earth, except the silent, endless night. Neighbors come, quietly, as the news spreads. They dig a grave in the corner of the garden, near the patch of wild flowers he liked. They murmur prayers, offer bread and silence, stand together for a while in the early light. Someone tells a story about Elric and the time he tried to ride a pig. Someone else hums a lullaby. When the grave is filled, Maud places a stone at its head and sits for a while, remembering. Life continues. The fields must be planted. The roof must be patched. The children, when they return, will find their father. Gone, but not forgotten. There is no marker, no record, just a patch of wildflowers that bloom every spring. But for a few people, for a few seasons, Elric's story lingers soft as dusk, quiet as old dreams. History, in the end, is made of these lives ordinary, invisible, essential. The world is quieter now. The fires have burned low, the fields are still, and the voices that once filled the lanes with laughter and complaint have faded into memory. Somewhere, wildflowers grow over forgotten graves. Children chase each other in meadows where armies once marched, and the names of Elric and Maud, Hilda and Sister Agnes, are whispered only by the wind. But if you pause, if you listen, you'll hear it, the echo of all those lives, humming beneath your own heartbeat, thrumming in the soft hush before sleep. What do we take from 1347? From the mud and hunger, the hope and heartbreak, the courage of people who never made history's pages but shaped its course nonetheless. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. We are taught to remember the kings and queens, the knights and generals, the grand battles and epic plagues. But the world was built and rebuilt, not by the few who led, but by the many who endured, by peasants who turned the earth, mothers who buried their dead and rose to work again, children who sang lullabies under thatched roofs while wolves howled beyond the walls. Elric's life and a million like his was anonymous, but their labor, their quiet resistance, their stubborn hope, these are the true architecture of the past. Without them, there is nothing. Their lives are the mortar between the stones. If you find yourself, centuries later, facing empty shelves or crowded hospitals, political turmoil, or a world that seems to change faster than you can keep up, remember this: the peasants of 1347 knew something about chaos and about survival. They endured years when the sun seemed lost, when hunger gnawed, when each day was another negotiation with fate. They kept going not out of naivety, but because going was all there was. Maybe you see yourself in them, a person getting by, loving fiercely, fearing for the future, dreaming of something softer. Let that sink in. The end of the world, for most, is not a bang, but a series of hard days, quiet losses, slow recovery. We are all a little bit medieval sometimes, hoping for rest, longing for kindness, seeking meaning in ordinary moments. You might not think of yourself as a hero. Elric didn't. Maud certainly didn't. Heroes are for stories, for people with banners and songs. But the real work of the world is done by those who keep going when no one's watching, who feed their children before themselves, who patch roofs in the rain, who reach out a hand when it's easier to turn away. Maybe that's what bedtime history is for, not to put you to sleep with tales of boredom and suffering, but to remind you, softly, that you're made of the same stuff as those who came before. You endure, you adapt, you survive. The Middle Ages were full of disaster, but also small joys. the smell of bread, the warmth of bodies in a crowded bed, the stubborn bloom of wildflowers over graves, every peasant who ever sang a lullaby, every healer who risked a curse for the hope of a cure, every mother who taught her daughter the names of weeds and stars. These are the secret triumphs that history forgets. Tonight, as you settle beneath your own roof, let the quiet echo of their lives wrap around you. Let the lessons sink in. Kindness matters. Community matters. So does laughter, even in the darkness. Why tell these stories at all? Why not let the past rot, like an old thatch, replaced by something new and shiny? Because memory is a form of defiance. To remember Elric, Maud, Hilda, and the millions like them is to honor survival, not just of the body, but of hope. It is to insist that ordinary lives matter, that suffering can be endured and transformed, that history is not just a record of tragedy, but a blueprint for resilience. You are the echo of all these forgotten voices. Every time you get up after a bad day, every time you make someone laugh or comfort a friend or share a meal, you carry their legacy forward. At some point the story ends, the pages close, the candle gutters out, and the world moves on. But if you listen, you'll hear it's still the quiet echo of all those who lived and died. Invisible and invaluable in the morning. The world will demand your attention again. Emails, headlines, the endless scroll of tasks. But for now, breathe. Remember that you come from a long, unbroken line of survivors. Your struggle is not new, and your hope is not naive. Maybe, centuries from now, someone will remember you not for what you owned or accomplished, but for how you endured, how you loved, how you laughed in the dark. The truth is, this story isn't about the suffering, it's about the going on anyway. The quiet bravery, the relentless tenderness, the refusal to be erased. So, as you drift off to sleep, warm, safe, maybe a little less bored than you expected, take this with you. The world is full of Elrics and Mods, of ordinary souls with extraordinary hearts. The end of the world was only ever the beginning, over and over, for those who dared to wake up and live. If you're still awake or peacefully asleep, thanks for wandering through the ruins with me. Like, subscribe, and come back anytime for more forgotten lives. Softly told, and remember, history may be boring, but boredom has a body count.